Hey guys, tonight we begin with the kind of jobs that would make modern office workers stare lovingly at their overflowing email inboxes and say, actually, maybe my life isn't so bad. So dim the lights, get comfortable, maybe grab a blanket, and together we're going to drift slowly through the strange and deeply unpleasant world of medieval employment. A world where health insurance did not exist. Labor laws were basically a fantasy. And your boss could absolutely throw chamber pot contents out the window without warning. Which, to be fair, happened fairly often. Tonight's journey takes us into castles that smelled like damp goats, monasteries full of exhausted scribes, muddy city streets packed with animal waste, and royal courts where people spent entire careers doing jobs so horrifyingly specific that historians still pause and say, wait, somebody actually had to do that? And the answer is yes, someone always had to do that. Because medieval society functioned almost entirely on human suffering and cabbage. So settle in, relax, and let's slowly wander into one of the least glamorous periods in working history. We begin with a job so revolting that even medieval people hated it. And that is really saying something. The gong farmer. Now, despite sounding weirdly cheerful, like perhaps a man who happily harvested bells or musical instruments, the word gong in medieval England actually meant human waste. Yes. This man's entire profession revolved around removing enormous quantities of royal poop, which already feels unfair. But somehow it gets worse. Because medieval toilets were not connected to sewer systems. Most castles, homes and inns simply dumped waste into cesspits. Giant underground holes filled with years of human filth, slowly fermenting beneath the building like some kind of cursed soup. And eventually, somebody had to climb inside and clean it. That somebody was the gong farmer, usually working only at night because literally nobody wanted to see them during daylight hours. These workers descended into pits of waste carrying buckets and primitive shovels. They scooped out human sewage by hand, loaded it into carts, and dragged it away from towns. Hopefully. Sometimes not very far away. Because medieval sanitation standards operated mostly on optimism. The smell alone must have been catastrophic. Historians describe cesspits producing toxic gases strong enough to knock workers unconscious. Some gong farmers reportedly died after inhaling fumes while waist-deep in sewage. Imagine explaining that at the pearly gates. How did you die? Well, too much castle toilet vapor. And strangely enough, gong farmers were often paid relatively well compared to other laborers, because nobody else wanted the job, which is one of the oldest economic principles in human history. If a task is horrifying enough, eventually someone has to offer more money, though unfortunately, money could not fully compensate for the social consequences. Gong farmers were treated as deeply disgusting by wider society. People avoided them. Many lived outside town walls. Their clothes permanently absorbed the smell of their work no matter how much washing occurred. And, which honestly probably wasn't much. Soap in medieval Europe existed, but widespread bathing enthusiasm absolutely did not. And that brings us naturally to another deeply cursed occupation, the fullers. Now at first glance, cloth cleaning sounds harmless enough, peaceful even. Perhaps a nice little medieval laundry service with baskets of fresh linens and cheerful humming? No, of course not, because medieval cloth production was incapable of remaining normal for even 5 seconds. Fullers cleaned the woolen cloth using a mixture of water, clay, norse, and urine. Human urine, sometimes collected from entire neighborhoods, because stale urine contains ammonia, which helped remove grease from wool. So fullers spent long days stomping cloth inside giant vats of fermented pee. Imagine walking into work every morning knowing your entire career depended on achieving the perfect urine consistency. And yes, medieval cities often had public urine collection pots. Civilization truly peaked early. The fuller's job involved trampling soaked cloth barefoot for hours, breathing overwhelming fumes, while handling heavy wet fabric all day long. Their skin frequently became irritated or infected. The smell followed them constantly. So naturally, many fullers were pushed toward poorer sections of town where nobody important had to smell them, which was a recurring theme in medieval urban planning. If a job smelled terrible, simply move the worker farther away. Problem solved. Now, while gong farmers and fullers suffered mainly from filth, another group endured a different kind of misery: the executioner. Oddly enough, executioners were both feared and deeply necessary. Medieval governments absolutely loved public punishments, but very few people actually wanted to perform them. For understandable reasons, executioners occupied a strange social position. They were paid professionals with important responsibilities, yet ordinary people often treated them like cursed outsiders. Some towns forced executioners to live separately from everyone else, which probably made neighborhood barbecues somewhat awkward. Sorry, Hans can't attend. Again, something about all the beheadings. And contrary to popular imagination, executioners did not always perform dramatic cinematic executions with graceful precision. Many were not especially skilled. Axes became stuck, blows missed. Crowds groaned impatiently while some exhausted executioner sweated through what was essentially medieval performance anxiety, which sounds horrifying for literally everyone involved. Some executioners also handled torture devices, prison maintenance, corpse disposal, and even stray animal control. Medieval authorities basically looked at them and said, "You already have the unpleasant job. Here are several more unpleasant jobs." Efficiency. And despite the grim work, executioners sometimes inherited the profession through family lines. Because once society considered your family tainted, other employment opportunities became difficult. So generations ended up trapped in careers nobody respected, which is bleak even by medieval standards. Now let's gently shuffle away from public death and toward another profession guaranteed to destroy your body: the tanner. Tanners transformed animal hides into leather, which sounds useful and rugged in theory. In reality, tanning was essentially an industrial nightmare soaked in chemicals, blood, rotting flesh, and animal brains. Fresh hides arrived covered in fat, hair, and leftover tissue. Workers soaked them in lime solutions, scraped them clean, then treated them with mixtures containing urine, dung, tree bark, and occasionally fermented animal matter. Basically, every disgusting substance available in medieval Europe eventually entered leather production. The smell became legendary. Entire tanning districts were deliberately placed beside rivers and far from wealthy neighborhoods because the stench could overpower entire sections of a city, and workers suffered constant exposure to toxic chemicals and disease. Cuts became infected easily, hands cracked and blistered. Respiratory illness spread through workshops thick with fumes, but leather remained essential for shoes, belts, armor straps, horse equipment, book covers, and countless daily items. So tanners continued working through conditions that modern labor inspectors would probably describe as absolutely not. And speaking of miserable, repetitive labor, we should probably visit the monasteries, because while monks are often imagined as peaceful, candlelit scholars, quietly sipping wine and illuminating manuscripts, many scribes were physically miserable. Imagine spending 10 or 12 hours daily hunched over parchment in freezing rooms, copying religious texts by hand. No ergonomic chairs, no heating, no proper lighting, just aching fingers and endless Latin. Monastic scribes frequently complained in tiny notes hidden at the ends of manuscripts. Historians still find these wonderful little emotional breakdowns preserved forever in ink. One scribe wrote, "Writing is excessive drudgery." Another simply celebrated finishing a manuscript by comparing the experience to surviving a shipwreck, which honestly feels fair. The work destroyed eyesight, fingers cramped permanently. Ink froze during winter. Mistakes required painstaking corrections on expensive parchment made from animal skin. And since books had to be copied manually before the printing press, the process never ended. Ever. There was always another manuscript waiting, another saint's life, another theological argument, another 400-page discussion about sin. Medieval Christianity truly loved a lengthy document, and while monks suffered quietly indoors, another unfortunate profession suffered very loudly outdoors. The night soil collector, which was essentially the urban cousin of the gong farmer. These workers roamed city streets collecting waste from cesspits, privies, gutters, and open drains, sometimes using carts, sometimes using buckets carried directly on poles across their shoulders, just sloshing gently through town. Absolutely terrible. Cities generated unbelievable amounts of filth. Horses alone produced mountains of manure daily. Add animal slaughter waste, spoiled food, sewage, and garbage, and medieval streets became chaotic ecosystems of bacteria. People dumped chamber pots directly from windows, usually with some warning, sometimes without, which added excitement to ordinary travel. Night soil collectors worked under cover of darkness, trying to prevent cities from drowning completely in their own waste. Disease constantly threatened them. The smell permanently embedded itself into skin and clothing. And yet without them, urban life would have collapsed even faster than it already did during outbreaks of plague. So in a strange way, these deeply miserable workers quietly held civilization together, which feels oddly noble in a horrifying sort of way. And now, before we continue further into medieval misery, let's slowly wander toward one of the strangest royal occupations ever invented. The Groom of the Stool. Yes, that was a real title. And unfortunately, it means almost exactly what you think it means. The Groom of the Stool served English kings by assisting them during bathroom visits. Imagine years of ambition leading to that sentence. The position began as a deeply personal servant role. The groom helped the monarch use the toilet, provided towels and water, and managed various delicate royal hygiene matters, which sounds humiliating. But strangely, the role evolved into one of enormous political influence, because the groom spent huge amounts of private time with the king, and in monarchies, proximity equals power. Soon, powerful nobles competed fiercely for the position because it granted direct access to royal conversations unavailable to almost anyone else. So medieval politics essentially created a situation where aristocrats fought each other for the honor of supervising royal bathroom routines. Human civilization remains astonishing. The Tudor court especially elevated the office into a highly trusted position. Kings discussed state matters casually while using the toilet, because apparently history never stops being weird. And honestly, after spending enough time around medieval history, you realize something important. No matter how elegant royal portraits appear, everyone still needed help pooping sometimes, which may be the single most grounding lesson history offers us.